Most compost piles fail for the same reason most modern gardening advice fails. It treats compost like a recipe instead of a living system. People, obsess over greens and browns, temperature and turning schedules, then wonder why their compost feeds plants inconsistently, smells off, or seems powerful one season and useless the next. The missing piece isn't another input from the store. It's the one ingredient older growers never skipped, and modern advice barely mentions at all: real mineral soil. Compost without minerals is just partially digested organic matter. Modern composting advice acts like microbes magically appear and organize themselves as long as carbon and nitrogen are balanced. That's not how soil biology actually works. Microbes need surfaces to live on, minerals to bind nutrients, and trace elements to function properly. When compost is built entirely from kitchen scraps, leaves, grass and cardboard, it lacks the mineral backbone that turns organic matter into stable humus. I learned this the hard way after years of making beautiful-looking compost that fed leafy greens well, but fell apart under fruiting crops. Tomatoes looked hungry, no matter how much compost I added. Peppers stalled. The compost wasn't weak, it was incomplete. Older compost systems always included soil for a reason. If you look at traditional composting methods across cultures, they almost always included soil, ash, clay or dust swept from paths and fields, not as filler but as structure. Soil microbes, evolved to live attached to mineral particles. When you add native soil to compost, you're really adding habitat, not nutrients in the fertilizer sense. In my own system, I found that adding even a small amount of native soil changed how the compost behaved. The piles heated more evenly, cured faster, and produced compost that didn't cause nitrogen drawdown when applied. The biology stabilized because, it finally had somewhere to anchor. Minerals are actually what stop nutrients from washing away. One of the biggest misconceptions out there is that compost itself holds nutrients. It doesn't, at least not well on its own. Nutrients stick to charged mineral surfaces, especially clays and fine silts. Without those surfaces, nutrients just move freely and, get lost. This is why compost-only raised beds often perform well for a year or two and then decline. Organic matter burns off, nutrients leach, and there's nothing underneath holding the system together. When I started blending compost with native soil at roughly 4 parts compost to 1 part soil by volume, nutrient stability improved immediately. Beds stayed productive longer with fewer inputs. So, this isn't about dirt contamination, it's really about biology. A lot of gardeners actually avoid adding soil to compost because they've been told it slows things down or adds pathogens. But in reality, native soil introduces diverse microbes that are adapted to your climate, your crops, and your rainfall patterns. Store-bought inoculants just can't replicate that. Now, I'm not talking about dumping heavy clay into a compost pile. Not at all. Personally, I use garden soil scraped from bed edges, dried and crushed clods, or even fine dust collected during bed prep. Just a shovel or two per cubic meter of compost is enough to make a difference, and it won't compact the pile. Compost microbes need trace minerals just like plants do. Trace elements like iron, zinc, copper, and manganese don't really come from banana peels or lettuce scraps in any meaningful amounts. They come from mineral weathering. When compost lacks these, microbial enzymes just don't function optimally, and nutrient cycling, it slows down. This becomes obvious in hydroponic systems, where compost teas made from mineral-poor compost cause deficiencies, even when macronutrients are present. When the same compost includes soil-derived minerals, teas become more stable, pH swings reduce, and plant response, it just improves. How I actually add soil to compost in practice. In backyard piles, I sprinkle thin layers of soil between organic layers instead of mixing it all at once. This prevents clumping and keeps airflow intact. In bins, I dust soil over fresh additions the same way you'd salt food lightly, not bury it. In raised bed composting, I intentionally scrape a half-inch of native soil into the pile when cleaning beds at the end of the season. Nothing goes to waste. That soil carries microbes already familiar with the plants that grew there. Soil actually helps compost cure properly rather than just cooling off. A pile can stop heating up and still be biologically immature, which is something folks often overlook. Compost that contains minerals cures more reliably because, fungi are able to colonize it properly. These fungal networks bind organic matter to minerals, forming stable humus, instead of just loose fragments that break down too quickly. This is really the difference between compost that feeds your plants steadily and compost that, gives a quick flush and then just disappears. In my own beds, mineral-rich compost actually lasts an entire season longer before it needs replenishing. And honestly, raised beds tend to expose this mistake much faster than in-ground gardens do. Raised beds, they really do magnify errors because they're isolated systems. Compost-only beds, they tend to collapse over time. But beds blended with both soil and compost together improve year after year. Personally, I aim for a minimum of 20% mineral soil in raised beds in the long run, even if that means adding it slowly over several seasons. This also improves water behavior. Beds drain better without drying out, roots penetrate deeper, and compaction becomes less of an issue because aggregates actually form. This is why compost alone isn't living soil. Living soil isn't just organic matter plus microbes. It's a partnership between biology and minerals. Compost feeds life, but soil gives that life a home. If you skip the mineral component, you end up constantly chasing deficiencies, pests, and, weak growth. Once I stopped treating compost as a standalone solution and started treating it as one part of a soil system, everything changed. Fewer amendments, fewer problems, better harvests. Modern advice, honestly, simplified composting too much. Simplification made composting accessible, but it also stripped out critical context. The forgotten ingredient isn't exotic. It's the ground beneath your feet. Compost works best when it reconnects organic matter back to the mineral world it came from. If this kind of grounded, experience-based gardening helps you grow better food with fewer inputs, subscribe to Gentle Herb Living and share this video with someone who keeps making compost but never quite gets the results they expect. Better soil comes from understanding what actually makes it whole.